Among those testifying before the panel, Ed Overton. He is a professor emeritus at Louisiana State University and a specialist with offshore spills and environmental damage. And Dr. Overton, it's good to have you back with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
What is the one point, Doctor, you wanted to get across during your testimony before the oversight panel last week in Louisiana?
Well, I think the biggest point was the importance of stopping the well as soon as possible. I think we're very close to that. And then as soon as the well is stopped, try to remove as much oil off the surface of the Gulf as we possibly can before it gets on shore and causes the massive damage. So we can't just stop the well and say, hey, we're there. We've got to continue working to remove the oil as effectively as possible while it's way offshore and not cause the damage that occurs when it gets on our beaches as well as our grassy and marshy shorelines.
Well, what is your take on the removal process so far? There is so much shoreline involved and frankly so much water in the Gulf of Mexico that's affected by this spill. Are you seeing some positive feedback from what's going on so far?
Yes, I think so. We're still in the middle of this thing, and of course the spill is still going on. But we think that there's a massive area out there, and there's lots of area in the Gulf in the impacted zone that has no oil in it. In fact, you've got to go out and look for oil to find thick oil. Now, once you find it, you're in pretty thick oil. So, but for instance, in Louisiana, there's something like 7,700 miles of coastline, and only a couple of 100 to 300 miles have been impacted. So not the entire coastline has been damaged yet. So there is a little bit of good news. We don't know how bad the damage is. We won't know for a couple of years because that's how long it takes for damage to show up. But and of course on sandy beaches, the oil is being cleaned up fairly quickly and being removed. The damages this summer to the tourist season, the economic damage is horrendous. The economic damage from the moratorium is horrendous. All of this is part of a response to this spill. So there's a lot of people put in great constraints here because of the loss of income and the loss of their jobs. That is the big damage right now. I think our environment is going to come out relatively easily unscathed. Offshore, there's been pretty massive damage, but these environments return to normal fairly quickly once the oil stops and is skimmed up and removed. It's amazing how quickly environments recover if given half a chance.
Now, considering the images we've all seen from the recovery effort, from skimming and burning offshore to hand and shovels digging the oil off of beaches around the Gulf Coast, is there one particular mitigation effort that you think has been most successful so far, that's having the best effect?
Well, the one that I would always recommend is skimming where at all possible. What happens when you skim, you actually collect the oil off the water, and then you can recycle it. And I think everyone agrees that recycling is good. Some oil can't be skimmed, and the oil, you need to be fairly thick oil to skim it. You need to have aerial assets to guide your skimmers to where the thick oil is. Remember, the oil is not evenly spaced in that massive area. For example, if I started driving today, I'm in Baton Rouge, and was driving 60 to 70 miles an hour to the eastern extremity of the oil, it would take 5 to 6 hours just driving that distance to give you some idea of the massive area that's being covered by this oil spill. So the oil is spread out over this massive area. It's not evenly spaced. You need to get your skimmers into the thick oil and let them recover it. What you can't skim, you ought to disperse. What you can't disperse offshore, you ought to have rapid fleet of skimmers that as the oil approaches nearshore environments, you try to get it up before it comes on shore. And of course, the final area of defense is trying to remove the oil once it gets on shore. Pretty easy to remove the oil off beaches, very difficult to remove the oil off marshy shorelines.
Is there a theory, Doctor, that it can't get any worse? Those are dangerous words, I know, but would you agree that to some extent the oil in the Gulf has had its impact and there's not much more damage that can be done in terms of what washes ashore and what affects marine life and aquatic life?
Well, there's still an awful lot of oil in the Gulf area offshore, and we haven't seen the end of the coastal impacts yet. I don't think we're over the hump. It depends on how quickly the oil is cut off. The well is sealed on a permanent basis. We don't know the long-term impact to some indicators of the environment. When I say that our environment returns to normal, most environmental indicators return to normal, but not all. Certainly there are going to be some long-term impacts that we might not see for a decade or two, but most environmental impacts return to normal after 2 to 5 annual cycles. So next year, the year after, people in Louisiana will be offshore fishing, and they'll be catching most of the species. There are probably going to be some that will not return to normal. Their normal background levels pre-spill won't be here for maybe a decade or two. But most environmental indicators will be pretty much back to normal. The oysters takes 3 years. Oysters are probably your largest impact commercial product, and it's going to take at least 3 years for those stocks to be returned to normal.
Final topic I want to bring up, Dr. Overton, is the moratorium, or the proposal that has come out from the White House last week. I know in Louisiana there are some very strong feelings against the moratorium and the potential for more economic damage. But regarding the new rules, what is your take on proposals to hand out deep water drilling permits based on a company's or a rig's potential to respond to a catastrophic event? Is this too much delving into the future rather than on concrete details in terms of what has happened in the past?
Well, I'm not a policy person, but of course everybody down here has an opinion about the moratorium and the horrendous impact it's having on the coastal states and on Louisiana in particular. It's literally destroying an already damaged economy. But in order to work offshore in deep water, this is a very, very expensive venture. So normally you don't have the small operators in deep water environments. You're looking at companies like BP, ExxonMobil, Chevron, the big players that'll be out there. And clearly they should have the assets to be able to respond to a spill. I mean, that's part of the environmental impact statement of getting a permit, that you are capable of responding to a spill, and these companies need to have the wherewithal. I think we were all surprised by this event. Everybody was caught flat-footed. The government was surprised. The people of Louisiana and the Northern Gulf were surprised, and I'm sure BP was surprised. But it is an event that nevertheless happened, and we need to make sure the next time we have an event like this that we're prepared with adequate skimmers in the Gulf, adequate response personnel, a reasonable plan to respond to this and to get rid of the oil. And also by then, hopefully we'll just have a feeling for how much damage this spill has occurred. It's critical as we go forward that we understand the total impact of this spill. Is it going to be as bad as some people had predicted? I certainly hope not, but we need to know that. We need to follow the environmental impacts of this spill for 5 to 10 to 15 years out so that we'll know what to expect in the future. After the Ictoc spill, not massive damage in the northern Gulf of Mexico. So we don't really, at least I don't know what happened on the Mexican coastline, but in the U.S. coastline, Ictoc spill was another massive well blowout, very little impact long term in the northern Gulf, and I'm hoping that we can say the same thing for this spill. But we don't know until after the fact. We're in the middle of the event. We need to make sure that we do the research, develop the technologies that we can assess the damage, and also develop new and better technologies for booming, skimming. All of these things are part of the benefit that we could get out of this horrible, horrible event.
Well, given your endorsement regarding the effectiveness of those skimmers, do you think that the federal government needs to have its own skimmers on duty in the Gulf right now?
You know, normally I would prefer that the skimmers be a consortium of all the oil companies put together, but we certainly need significant offshore skimming capability, and I think that was one of the things that we don't have. It's fairly easy to build and come up with nearshore skimmers. You can take and modify boats fairly quickly, and that had certainly been done in this event. But it's much more difficult to build and change a tanker. So we need to have stationed in the Gulf and around major ports. For instance, we've got Louisiana Offshore Oil Port that brings in millions of barrels of oil a year. We need to have the capability to respond to large spills like this stationed in the Gulf of Mexico, and I suspect that that ought to be something like the old MSRC, a consortium of oil companies that can afford that. It's a massive government expense. We ought to take some of those offshore oil revenue monies that are being generated by oil production and divert those into making sure we have this capability, whether that's government owned or a private corporation. I think that's a good discussion that Congress needs to have over the next couple of years and pass legislation to make sure that we're ready for the next time.
And that may be right around the corner. Ed Overton is a professor emeritus at LSU.
We hope not.
Joining us this morning from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Dr. Overton, as I said, good to have you back with us. Thanks again for your insight.
Thank you very much for having me.